So thanks for the intro, Michael. As you mentioned, I lead the people team at Nextdoor. I've been with the company for about a year and a half now. Nextdoor is coming into its 10th year, and our mission is to cultivate a kinder world where everyone has a neighborhood they can rely on. We operate in 11 countries. In the United States, we're in almost every neighborhood, almost 250,000 neighborhoods around the country. And I think what you've seen during COVID-19 is, this really terrible era of this pandemic. You've seen the purpose of Nextdoor really coming to life. Primarily, why people come to Nextdoor is to connect to people in their neighborhood. We see ourselves as a neighborhood hub. And in this time where people are struggling with shelter-in-place mandates, there's been this just spike in desire to understand what's going on locally in your community. And so Nextdoor provides a platform to do that.
Thanks, Brian. So excited to chat with you, and excited to learn a little bit more about how you've been supporting your workforce. So tell us about what's your role in supporting your work that you guys have done to date, and a little bit more just about the people team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you and I have been working together, I think, for a couple of years now, right? And so our partnership with Modern Health is really at the center of how we think about mental health in the workplace. It's something I think that even just before this pandemic started, I think increasingly the way that we work has just drastically increased the impact on workers in this modern era. And so issues like stress and anxiety and depression, these are all symptoms of the way we work today. This kind of 24/7 notifications, always on, just creates this extra layer of stress as people just try to do their day-to-day job. So it's definitely something that I thought is a really important issue to be dealing with, even before we got into this era. And then, like you and I were talking before the webinar started, this just unprecedented, terrifying era that we're in of this coronavirus has added this whole other crushing layer of stress. People fearing for their personal health or their friends and their family health. And so it's exacerbated this problem in the workplace. And for Nextdoor, we're one of the companies that's seen this huge spike in interest in our product and engagement. I know at Modern Health, you're probably feeling the same thing. There's lots of companies that have a very different level of stress that comes from the business collapsing, and the circumstances for their success have really changed. But I think one silver lining for us is that our workforce really feels inspired by the ability to really like fight back against the coronavirus by letting neighbors help each other. And so we're able to draw from this kind of additional reservoir of positive energy of feeling like we can actually do something about it. That's been helpful, but it doesn't change that the overall picture is just still can be really intense.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, tell me a bit more about that. There's some companies we feel, I hate to use the word fortunate because these are obviously like unforeseen circumstances that aren't good for anyone, but have seen this almost as an opportunity, not just as an accelerant for their business, but an opportunity to really come together as a community and be part of a product that is part of the solution here. I'm curious, how do you feel like that's happened at Nextdoor, right? Nextdoor is obviously about community. And so do you feel like this has almost, been an activation for you guys to play a role in helping people come together and get through this time?
It certainly has. Before the coronavirus, I think one thing that was different about Nextdoor is when you use the app, which you can find on the web, you can find in the App Store on Google Play, download it today if you haven't done so already. Is that your product?
My fiance he literally uses it every day for everything. He's like, did you know this thing that was happening? Or like, oh my gosh, this person did this awesome thing. So yeah. He's like a Nextdoor super user.
Coronavirus was that your whole experience with Nextdoor is really dependent on the neighborhood that you live in. And so this is different from kind of big global platforms where you can connect to just everybody in the world. But what's really kind of fascinating about this current experience that's very local in nature, right? And so at this point, I think everyone's seen that famous video in Italy where people were singing out the windows during a mandated lockdown just to feel that connection of people around you. And there's just like no replacing that. And so what we've seen happen again around the world as we've all moved into these lockdowns is neighbors kind of going out onto their porch at 7 o'clock at night to cheer for healthcare workers, right? Or people to sing a song together just to hear other voices if you say you live alone. And that's just a very perfect scenario for something like Nextdoor, because it brings the actual neighbors that live near you who you might not even really know, right? Your neighbors aren't always necessarily your friends, but you do share this same local space. And so that phenomenon that's happening globally about wanting to experience your neighbors has been a big shift in the circumstances around how people experience Nextdoor.
Yeah, yeah, totally. One thing that we've done, I think that's similar, is these community webinars, right? Where we're doing, whether it's mindfulness or sessions similar to this, and anyone can join and just feeling like they're part of a community. It's been amazing to see the results and the reactions, and just how people are sharing their stories and being super vulnerable. I think it's times like these when people come together. So that's great to hear that that's happening for you guys, and what you're
Yeah.
able to do with supporting the
We
community.
we already cared quite a bit around issues like loneliness and social isolation again before this started, but I think that especially as we're all sequestered at home right now, which is much of the world, right? It's not just certain areas. That's another consequence that's just been really exacerbated. Like people are really feeling alone, and that there's studies that show that loneliness can be as bad as smoking a pack of cigarettes a week, right? And so this ability to find that connection, whether it's on Nextdoor or in one of your webinars, I think it's even more important right now. And you can really feel the gratitude people have when they come out of one of those group experiences that just makes them feel like they're not alone.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. We're in a time where there's this epidemic of loneliness, yet we've never been this connected as we ever have been before, right?
Yeah.
With all of the apps we have on our phones, the ability, I mean, it's crazy to think that not that long ago, we didn't even have cell phones or computers like this where you could, get home from work and live and operate the way we are today. It's interesting to think about that. It's these moments of, we're seeing people, like you said, the example in Italy, or seeing, students who are no longer in school come together and, whether it's like creating songs by having different people jump in with different sections, and then they're sharing it with the rest of the world, and it lights up everyone else's day. It's pretty amazing to see that. I think a huge part of what's bringing people together is, one, being vulnerable, that this is a difficult time, right? Like most social media, at least pre-COVID days, is like, here's my perfect life of everything that's going on. And now
Right.
people are really being vulnerable and trying to come together. And I think another thing is just like gratitude, and having perspective that people are in different situations here, and some worse than others, and just having gratitude and perspective, even just seeing how people are coming together in the community. So it's interesting to see that this type of pandemic or catastrophe that's happened has changed how we're using these platforms, right? It's no longer like, here's a picture of me and my perfect life. It's like, oh my
Right.
gosh, dealing with this, or been laid off, or going through this, or home without childcare. Like, this is hard. And so people
Yeah,
are
it has been.
coming.
I mean, I think that it's just a testament to the human spirit, right? Like there's this global crisis, and the kindness you're seeing people show to their neighbors or their friends and family in this public way is just truly inspiring. And it does feel like it was an unlock, right? It doesn't totally feel like the way
Yeah.
people were behaving before this. And so
Yeah.
hopefully that's something that stays with us, and people just reevaluate what coming out of this will be like.
You mentioned, I think before, that you guys created some sort of Slack channel to kind of show some of the positive things that you're seeing in the community.
Yeah, it's funny. We internally, we already had a Slack channel that we call it Nextdoor Praise. And it's basically a place that people would just share something they see happening in one of the neighborhoods around the world of, a neighbor helping a neighbor. Like a one we saw quite a bit in the beginning of this was people who were lower risk at getting COVID-19 and were young and healthy, offering higher risk, or the elderly, just like to go buy groceries or go to the pharmacy. And so
Oh,
this
awesome.
channel has become, it used to be like, I think it was some people were watching it, but it's become this, widely followed channel, because it's a way that as, employees of Nextdoor, we get this visceral reaction to the work we're doing is doing good in the world. And it's like this little burst of positive energy or positive reinforcement in this time that, again, is just so stressful. And
Yep.
so I actively encourage people. I mean, we're all on too many Slack channels, right? To use Slack for work, but this one in particular, I really push people to sign up for, because it's one of those little mental health breaks that can happen throughout the day.
Yeah, it's similar to, that's awesome. That's so cool. It's similar to we have a Slack channel called #happy that I think was used like pretty frequently pre-COVID days, but now like every single day people are adding things, whether it's funny memes or things that they're seeing or acts of kindness or like, wow, again, the Italy example of people coming out and singing. Every single day people are adding to it. And it's like right now our most, definitely our busiest Slack channel and where people are sharing the most. But I think to your point, it gives perspective that, hopefully going forward, it shouldn't take this level of a pandemic for us to take appreciation in little things and share that with each other and like
That's right.
find joy in kind of these little things that we can share with each other every day. But yeah, we have our #happy. I actually recommend for anyone listening to this, that's like a great way to keep things lighthearted at work and to get people to kind of share some of the things that are uplifting for them and with others. You'd be surprised how far it can go, just like a little story of something that you've seen and sharing that, hey, it made you happy, and sharing that with other people. It's contagious. So that's awesome. I guess getting a little bit more into kind of the impact of coronavirus on work. So obviously we're all, as people can tell, I've got a bed behind me in a guest bedroom and
Yep.
not a typical, office setup. We're adjusting to this. It's definitely, I'm sure, easier for some more than others. You've got parents at home without childcare who are balancing full-time jobs and kids. How have you seen, your workforce adapt to this, and what do you think has been really the biggest change over the last couple of months with just how you guys are working?
Well, we're about a month into, so we're headquartered in San Francisco, and we're about a month, maybe this is our 4th or 5th week, to being fully mandated virtual work from home. And so I think the best way to describe that is everything was turned upside down. It
Yeah. Yeah.
completely, very quickly. I mean, we were a company where probably 3/4 of our company was working in person at our headquarters in San Francisco. And we were growing as a global company. So obviously we had remote capabilities. Sometimes people work from home. People are used to being on VC calls. And we had to really quickly make the decision. We kind of see it coming. If you go back to like
Yeah.
late February, early March, the way that the pandemic was cascading, the way the city of San Francisco was just ratcheting up its guidance, like day after day, it was clearly becoming more and more serious. We kind of weren't thinking about, we really quickly changed from, should we work from home, fully virtually, to like, when are we just going to do this? And before we said, we're going to make this switch, we had a lot of work to figure out, not just like, how are we going to figure out to do a video call from our guest room, but how is the company in the aggregate going to work together? Like all of these meetings and processes that are so much built around the in-office experience, like we really had to scramble to just start to get a playbook in place so that when we did flip the switch, we wouldn't then have to spend the next 2 weeks trying to get everything back online. So it's a real sprint over a few days to turn that around. I think that a couple of things that we learned, the first one was, it's kind of similar to your #happy example or Nextdoor Praise, is we really looked at what we already had that we could kind of turn on or lean into further. Then I think in a crisis, there's this instinct to like kind of start something new and just get it going. But it's hard to just create something new. If you have something that's halfway there already, that you can then push further into, you cover a lot more ground, so to speak. And so for us, like we were already really pretty rigorous around communications. We had a weekly all hands. Our CEO, Sarah Fryer, sends a note at the beginning of every week. We send kind of a company level update soon after that email that just gives people status on everything. And so, we would always be like, hey, these are important emails to read. Like, this is how you're getting updates. But once this crisis happened, like people went from being heads down to being heads up and being like, what is going on? Like, there's just all these questions. And so we pushed people to these channels. We're like, this is really the time to read these emails and come to these meetings, because this is where we're talking about it. And that let us kind of corral all of this scattered, like, what are we going to do, normal reaction to the crisis, and get people quickly on the same page so we could work through some of these just structural problems of going to a new workforce. I have to say that people who work in other offices work from home, like they loved it. It was just like the great equalizer for the person who was always the only one on VC. It's just very much the feedback we get from, you know, our European offices or the East Coast is just like, this is just feels so much more in balance now because we don't have that giant center of gravity at headquarters that's drawing people in.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. What have you seen to be some of the requests from people, or, you know, have there been any certain needs or requests from the workplace and adjustments and how people are operating?
Yeah, one thing that we did, I mean, I could tell right away that there was a lot of people that like working from home was just not well set up. Like you
Yep.
imagine all of a sudden, you know, you have 4 roommates and they're all working from home now, and there's like one living room and people are sitting on their bed with their laptop for like 9 hours in a row, you know, and so it's like, that's not
Yeah,
going to
they're
work.
hunched over, like everyone's backs are gonna be broken
Yeah,
after
it's
this.
just awful. And then, you know, there was like what we were calling the great nanny apocalypse, where all of a sudden people were worried about the kids being home from school. And then the next day they were like, wait, we're not going to have any childcare either. And
For
so
months.
for
Yeah.
months, you know, and so one thing we did around just the office setup was we decided, well, look, we're not in our office, which means some of our costs there are going to be reduced. We're not going to be providing the same amount of snacks or food. You know,
Yep.
we would do regular meals. We don't need to kind of pay for cleaning every day. So there was kind of some extra funds there. And so we repurposed it to give everybody a one-time work from home stipend.
Nice.
And when we asked, it was like the range of issues was so wide. We were just like, just take the stipend and do your best, right? And
Yep.
for some people it was a chair, for some people it was a monitor. It kind of didn't really
Yep.
matter. And I think what I found was that was just a very, I mean, some companies gave more, whatever you want to think about that is kind of depends on the company's circumstances. But I think that it was just a visible signal to people that like, hey, we know this is really hard and we know you're really working hard to make it work. Just here's some help, right?
Yeah.
And I think just the visible action that we had taken a step to try to make it better was well received, because it meant people knew we were sensitive to what they were going through and we're just trying to do
Yep.
something to make it better. And I think that's a really important thing. Like you're talking about, hey, this is really hard, we're doing our best, but what actions are you taking that are different, that show that you're actually, you know, seeing what people are going through?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great idea. Yeah, to give people the support to be able to set themselves up, because yeah, I mean, a lot of people out there who are, you know, working from their bed and have roommates, and you know, it's just not conducive to helping them stay productive and
Yeah.
physically and mentally healthy as well.
The other thing that was
Yeah.
interesting that was related to just working with what you have. So like many companies, we have an employee resource group model where just different communities of employees come together to talk about perspective that they want to share. And so we have lots of different ones. And one that was one that we had that I would say before the pandemic really wasn't hugely engaged was the ERG around parents. We call it the parenthood, like the neighborhood for parents. And like many parents, like they're just busy. So they would get together
Right.
maybe once a month. You
Yeah.
know, most people kind of could make it or not make it, but it was kind of light engagement. And then when it happened, you know, obviously with the schools closing, like all of the parents were like, what are we going to do about this? And so the first step we did was like, everyone get into this parenting ERG, like join this channel, join this group, like all of you pile into this one virtual room, because it kind of brought the similar questions together. Because I was getting questions like, well, what are you going to do for parents? And what I quickly learned was like the issues of someone who has a 6-month-old is very different from someone who has a 3-year-old, which is very different from someone who has a 10-year-old. And
Yep.
so by getting all the parents together, they just started sharing, they just started solving problems together. And it was like, here's a how to homeschool your kid for the day template. Here's a bunch of kid-friendly movies. Like here's just all this stuff started really spinning around. And the parenting ERG became like the most active ERG overnight, because there was this disruption that they really needed to figure out together. And it was no longer like a nice to have lunch, talk to friends. It was like,
Right. Yeah.
I have
Like
a
we need
crisis at home
help.
right now and I need to figure it out. And so who has answers? And then so that was kind of a great way to take what we had and make it work better. Cause I would say only maybe a third of the parents of the company were even in the channel. And I just saw it like tripled in 2 days, because everyone
Wow.
was like, this is where you go if you're a parent, get information. The secondary effect that I think was insightful was one of the big problems working from home, whether you work from home in normal times or in the pandemic, is this kind of lack of social connection, right? It's just hard to recreate that casual exchange that you get in person. And people who love to work from home, this is always the hardest thing. And so
Right.
what was interesting, because these parents were just scrambling around like dealing with their kids, there was this whole other layer of social connection that emerged that was like all the funny memes about parents dealing with their kids and like funny pictures of their
Their
own
kids running around behind them. Yeah.
exactly. But that brought like this laughter and smile, which is this really important aspect of dealing with stress. That wasn't why everybody joined, but was an added benefit of going through this adversity together. That everyone's like trying to recreate right now. Everyone's trying to be like, how do you get that fun aspect of working with people when we're all alone in our guest bedrooms? And sometimes it can feel forced. You're like, hey, we're gonna have the forced fun channel, or and that stickiness that the parents were going through the situation together, I think really turbocharged the engagement that group was.
Yeah. Yeah, oh man, it's awesome. I truly do say I'm like, the parents right now are the real heroes of what's going on. I do not understand. I'm like how they manage it, how you manage, working and kids, and especially, we are a lot of our execs who are, managing having no childcare, and their partners also working full-time stressful jobs at startups and elsewhere. How do you juggle it with each other? So one thing that we've done that I think's worked well is we've basically said, block off your calendar for when like you are
Right.
on child duty, and like, hey, we're all home, we've got nothing else to do, like we'll
That's
meet
right.
at random time, whether it's so some of us will have meetings at 7 p.m. and people will be dedicating certain times of their calendar during the day to be on childcare and
That's right.
switching off with their partners. And I think that's helped a lot, because it's just, hey, this is what you have to do to just be flexible, and the team flexible to support them during this time. I think that's helped a lot.
It's very true. I mean, I think companies I worked at in the past, some people try to block off their calendar for like work time, and no one cares.
Yeah, they're like,
no
okay,
one, no one cares. It's like, oh, great, you're working, you have time for a meeting with me. But what we've noticed is when people put, even like in the middle of the day, like lunch
yeah,
kids, like it's
kid
sacrosanct. Like
duty.
people
Yeah,
totally
yeah,
understand, like that's not appropriate to think that they're available. And so it's just this interesting shift on how you manage your calendar. I do see that this dynamic of like you work during the day and you go home at night is completely kind of just working
yeah,
in temporary space. And one of my peers pointed out, like, we're not going to soccer games on the weekend either. So like, what's the difference between a meeting on Friday or Saturday at this point? Like, we're all just
yeah,
home all the time.
yeah,
Where I think before people might be like, God, you have to work on the weekend or something. Like, it's really now about just balancing out that flexibility so you can make both elements work, since you're in the same space no matter what day of the week,
totally.
or whether it's daytime or nighttime.
Totally, totally. Yeah, I think we're seeing that a lot. It's interesting, right? Because now you see like on someone's calendar, maybe from 1 to 3 kid duty, and it's like, total respect and also appreciation
Right.
and empathy now that that person's balancing a lot. Whereas I feel like I almost think this has trended us in the right direction of parents being more open about, hey, I have to, I
I
have
have to go.
childcare, I
I
need to
agree.
go pick up my kids. Whereas in the past, parents, if they have to leave work early and maybe felt like they couldn't share that, now I feel like this has normalized it. It's like, okay, of course, if you're on child duty, no one's going to schedule a meeting
Right.
that goes past 5 or
Yeah,
whatever time, or 4, in order to go focus on your kids. So I almost think that this has helped us, when we do return and go back to work, being more open about that, and
definitely.
feeling more comfortable, which is great, Um, I'm curious, have you seen, we're talking a lot about how schedules have changed, and, people's schedules over the weekend and just being flexible. How have you seen this impact productivity? Have you seen a drop in productivity? Do you feel like maintain levels of productivity? I feel like there's a lot of debate over remote work longer term, right? We're obviously all remote right now, but there's some workforces who are completely distributed remote. They already were. I'm curious to see or to hear more about how you feel like that's impacted productivity at all.
Yeah, so there's a couple things, and I think I would break it up into short term and long term. So I certainly feel like in the last few weeks, we've had this huge burst of productivity, and it's for a couple of reasons. One is, I think, again, this is maybe unique to Nextdoor or similar companies. We just felt this urgency around what our product could do to help in this difficult time, that everyone, like in all teams, just locked in to be like, this is really important that I work hard right now because we can help, like we can help the world, right? Like the faster we go, the better that neighbors can help each other. And so there was this dialing up that led to greater focus. I do think like once we sorted through logistically, like how to get people set up at home, we cut out like, for 2/3 of the company that was commuting every day, we just created another 2 hours a day. Right.
Yeah.
So like there was just less time getting to and from work, which in the areas, is like significant for a lot of people. And then the third thing is when you're not used to working from home, like we did a survey for everybody at our company who already is a remote worker and try to just get, how do you do this? Because a lot of people are doing this for the first time. And the number one thing everybody says is you really need to build in breaks, so you'll just sit there for 11 hours in a row. And so because all of us were new, we were all just sitting in front of our computer like 10 hours in a row. There were no breaks. And so that the lemon was squeezed dry for like every minute of productivity in these last few weeks. But I think what we're really feeling now is the sustainability of that is not long-term. There's been this rush of adrenaline, but now people are realizing like, I can't sit on my bed for 8 hours in a row. Like I need to go outside. I do need to take those breaks. I do need to figure out how to not just get stuck here, because the way that's been building for the last few weeks, I think people are just seeing, if we're going to be here for a while, I've got to do it differently. Right. And so I think long-term, productivity wise, like you get a lot of different type of engagement when you're together that really brings a lot of energy over the longer term, right? It's those relationships you have with coworkers. It's those kind of serendipitous ideas when you bounce into someone you don't work with regularly. And so that kind of doesn't really show up in like what you're trying to get done today or like even this week. But over the long haul, like you have to have a way to think about that. I think it's different for companies that were built from the ground up to be a remote workforce than companies and cultures that are really kind of look for that connection together. So as we look out, like I think we have other types of challenges we need to sort through to make sure that we don't suffer over the long term.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like we're in a really similar boat in that regard. We had basically, as it's happened, a huge increase in demand for our services, both from employers and existing employers we're working with and their employees. And it almost was this, opportunity for the whole team to come together and just rally. And it was like this huge, adrenaline rush of like, oh my gosh, people need us more than ever right now. Like, let's just keep going. Like Friday, what's the difference between Friday and Saturday? Like they need us, just like keep burning the fuse. And I think now, and part of that, it was like Q1 end of quarter, like all these people needing our services to launch as quickly as possible. And now we're trying to figure out, okay, like it might be like this for a while now. Like what can we do to support ourselves to still be a sustainable business and not, completely burn ourselves out. And so part of that is one, I feel like what's helped us is just like addressing it and understanding like this might be a new normal for us for now. Like it's going to be faster pace and just acknowledging that. And then the second thing that we've done is we increased we actually doubled our mental health stipend. And we're like, hey, we're a mental health company. Let's practice what we preach. Like if you're feeling at all stressed or anxious or burnt out, like we're not requiring it, but we are very strongly encouraging, like talk to your coach or therapist or, find time for meditation or mindfulness. And I feel like that's really helped people kind of level set of like, okay, this might be the new normal, but what can I do to almost, for us, we're a mental health company, practice what we preach of building our own resilience? Because I think one thing that a lot of people are thinking about as this pandemic has happened, and this, I don't want to, I guess, be pessimistic, but like, who knows if this might happen again in our lifetimes? And like, how can we build resilience and mental toughness when these things do happen? Because I feel like this is one massive catastrophe that's brought the whole world together, but things like this on a micro level happen in people's lives every day, whether it's loss of a loved one or being a new parent and literally getting 0 hours of sleep and also being, in a job where you're managing a big team, or maybe trying to, pay a mortgage, right? There's all these things that come up on a micro level. And this is just like forcing ourselves to really build resilience and address our mental health head on.
Yeah, I mentioned, the way we communicate at Nextdoor, we communicate, we talk a lot, we send out a lot of written communications just to keep people really informed about what's happening. And I found that, in this, call it like month 2 now, right? The first month was really about all of this. What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing in the workplace? What are we doing in our product? Shipping cadence, just a lot of stuff that was happening. I've found now that like I'm really talking much more about like the mental health challenge as something that we need to plan for, because like we got a lot accomplished in the last month. And again, as that adrenaline wears off, you can just feel people are like, okay, I don't really feel great about this approach over the long term. Like I see why
Right.
it got us here. And so you have to now, we're just kind of looking at how do we think about if we do need to settle in. And it's not just kind of shelter in place, right? At some point, the shelter in place is going to be lifted, but it's not just going to be like, great, now it's
Go
2019.
back to normal. Yeah,
There's
exactly.
just no way that is what the scenario is going to be. And so just thinking about how we think about the collective health of the company, right? Like in our workplaces, but also making sure people are thinking about their personal, physical and mental health as we get through this. I just find myself talking more and more about, because it's becoming the new top of mind, right? Where there
Yep.
was a lot of other questions earlier on.
Yep. Yeah. No, I'm curious. How have you seen the conversation around mental health shift to pre-coronavirus times to now? Do you feel like more people are talking about it? It sounds like you certainly are, and your team is,
Yeah.
definitely aware. Do you feel like other people are sharing stories or things or ways that they're, kind of being resilient to everything happening?
One thing that we're doing right now is I'm trying to shift the tone from, I think a lot of good leaders and managers, or really anyone who is a good leader or manager, displays empathy for their team and their people, right? Like I don't know anyone who's really good at it that doesn't. But a lot of times that comes across as a leadership style attribute, or a way of kind of like a habit of just checking in. And what I'm shifting more to now is this is really more of like an operational priority than just being like like an extracurricular thing, right? Like starting the meeting about what everybody do this weekend, or how are you doing, is kind of like it feels like this check-in that good people do. But now we're really kind of raising the volume on, everyone really needs to have this discussion with everyone on their team about like, what is the plan to deal with the stress of these circumstances, because everyone's individual circumstances is different. For some it's childcare, for some it's roommates, for some it's socially isolated, they're single and live alone. Some people feel like they're not contributing, some people they feel like they have too much to do. Like you can't really give a company level response on what to do, but we can push very clearly into like, you really need to be having this conversation. Like if you've been too busy in the last 3 or 4 weeks, you really need to do it now. Because if you kind of don't break that down and get into that conversation with people, it's going to end up blowing up later. And this
Yep.
is kind of common practice with mental health anyway, but because of the volume of people that are dealing with this increase in stress, it's really kind of like a company level challenge that we need to grapple with. And I just don't think that is the norm.
Yep.
And so
How, Well, I was going to say, what would you recommend to any managers out there, people managers out there? What can they do to do this? Is it just like doing more informal check-ins to check in on how people are doing, or at the beginning of meetings, adding the like checking in? One thing I've noticed, you say this and it's interesting. I'm like, every call now that I have, people are really asking like, how's it going? And sharing like, oh my God, this crazy thing happened. Like my kid ran behind me naked while I was in a call, whatever it is, right? They're like
yeah,
sharing these stories and it feels normal and okay because of what's going on. And you realize like, we never really checked in with each other or shared these kind of things,
that's right.
prior to this happening. But I'm curious, what are some tips or advice for anyone who's listening in that they could do with their teams to check in?
So I think one thing that some managers struggle with, I'll actually quote Laszlo Bach, who was the SVP of People Operations at Google, friend and mentor to me. And he said something publicly recently, which is, some managers are trying to choose between empathy and productivity, right? And particularly teams that just feel like they're just so busy. They kind of like, we just don't have time. Can you just get through that? But if someone's really freaking out, right? If they're like really breaking down for some reason, they're just not going to be productive. And I thought that was like the insight. No matter what you want, like you might not like the answer by having to lead with empathy, but you can't just start with we're too busy, or you certainly can't
Right.
go for too long. And so that's why you have to start with not just, hey, how was your weekend, or how are you doing? If they start to share, you need to stay with that conversation. You can't be like, okay, cool, we got to move on. We have a lot to talk about today, because
Right.
that's just gonna, it's just gonna make it worse. And so I think that the tips for managers, what we're talking about is like, you really want to come up with a plan, like the same way you'd set goals on a quarterly basis. Some companies are like, well, what's your personal health goal for the quarter? Like that's kind of fun and nice to have, but it's like essential right now that people understand what are you doing to manage your mental health day to day and week to week. And so, we're really trying to be more forceful on providing there's tons of resources, right? There's templates, there's how to think about one person really wants to make sure they're exercising. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Pair them up with someone else who likes to exercise and make sure they're getting that exercise. Some people need
Yep.
time with their kids. Some people need to just shut off. And so just make sure the manager understands what that mental health strategy is and then can help implement it. And I think,
Yep.
again, the mistake is people treat it kind of like as separate from work, like an extra thing, but really we're busy on what we're building. And for right now, I just think it's so important that it's at the same level of priority because it's so many people, and this doesn't even get into the actual impacts of if we're unsuccessful with the pandemic, like people getting sick, people's parents getting sick, like that is going to cause massive disruptions. And it hasn't really rolled through, or it hasn't rolled through our company or some industries because this Bay Area has really been sheltered in place for a while. But at some point you have to be ready for that to
Yeah.
happen. And so
Yeah.
thinking through that scenario now versus hoping it doesn't happen or trying to figure it out once it does happen is definitely something we're trying to talk more about.
Yep. Yeah, it's so true. It's interesting that you bring up really each manager talking to their team and the individual, because we were talking as a leadership team. We were like, what can we do to prevent burnout? And it was a good point. It was like, well, burnout is so different for so many different people, right? And
Mhm.
like struggling with mental health is different for different people. We had one leader was saying like, I and some people on my team, when I'm motivated by having an impact and autonomy, like I'll just work nonstop. Like I'll work through the weekend just because like I'm, so excited about what I'm doing. And that's not burnout for me. Like burnout for me is if I don't get to ever spend time with my kids, right? Where someone else might say, to your point, like I need to exercise every day, or I need to shut off if I'm checking email, after 9 or 10 p.m. Like I'm not sleeping because my brain's racing. And so really understanding at the individual level as a manager what you can do to support each person, because I think the like standard things of just like sheer hours or what someone's working on, it's hard to really understand like how that's impacting their mental health and if they're in a good place or not.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good point. I'm curious, what have you done? You're a new parent, a new dad.
Yeah,
What have you done to take care of your own mental health during this time?
totally. I mean, having a 3-month-old burst of like a chunky baby that's trying to figure out the world is incredibly grounding. It is an immediate reset for me to just think about all the stuff he's trying to figure out. And so a silver lining for me being here all the time is I can just grab him for a few minutes in between meetings. So that's certainly number one. Definitely have tried to dial up my commitment to just these short mental health breaks. Like we were talking before, I love the 4-minute meditation that I get from the Model Health app.
Yeah.
And more of my team, I think, is figuring out why I'm 4 minutes late to a meeting is because I like snuck it in between those two. But people really underestimate the impact of those little interventions. Like they're trying to get 3 hours to separate, and that sometimes is just difficult because of work or stuff at home. I mentioned we have a global all hands, which we're doing virtually right now. And one of the things we do each week is we provide an employee spotlight, and we usually have monthly themes for what we're trying to do. And so in March, it was International Women's History Month. And one of our software engineers, a woman, her name is Mediha, wanted to recognize this woman who was a leader in the mindfulness movement. And she actually led the entire company through a guided meditation. Like we were
Wow.
all going, we went from like, OKRs to like product releases to this spotlight on this like woman in the mindfulness movement to like, okay, we're all going to do it. And Medea did this unbelievable job. And it was just a few minutes, right? But it was like a body scan. And I certainly felt like how stressed I was. It just
Yeah.
reminded me like these little breaks are critical if you don't take them. Right. And so I'm trying to just make sure I have those micro mental health breaks as much as I can on a day-to-day basis.
Yep. Yeah. No. Well, can only imagine. Kudos to you, and it's great that I guess the silver lining here for you and other parents getting to spend the time, right, with which is the
Yeah.
most important time with
But the key
kids.
thing is that everyone needs a plan, because I think what I found was everyone knows they need a plan, but they're too busy.
Right.
So I'm
Yeah.
really trying to force that in to like make sure you know what it is and then stick to it. Because it's like people like, oh, I just want to finish this one more thing, and then every day that gets pushed out, the more that stress level can really build up and become really debilitating. So I think it's really important, as to deal with it in the moment.
I
And everything.
My partner has a good tactic. He'll just come in and be like, "Oh, it's that time. Shut my laptop as I'm in the middle of typing something." I'm like, "You can't get mad at me. You said that you were stressed out
That's
for not
right.
turning off yesterday until 9 p.m. So you're done."
That's right. I think that idea of having someone to help you, right? One of our big values at Nextdoor is investing in community. And we found a lot of success. It's like that parenting example I gave you, that the group helped each other through this period. And so sometimes it's not, just what are the specific things you need to do. It's like, I need someone to tell me to just shut my computer at a certain day.
Yep.
I'm just
Yep.
not going to do it. I know I should, but I'm not going to. So someone needs to Slack me or come into the room or something. And just have a plan is better than any specific tactic one over the other, given everybody's own individual
Yep.
circumstances.
Yeah, I guess I should say it takes, for me, it's a lot more than that. I've got a therapist, a coach, a couples therapist. I do
Yep.
all the things. I'm proud to share. Would not be standing here if it wasn't for all the time that I invest on a weekly basis in my own mental health. But I guess that makes sense, right? Got to
Yeah.
practice what we preach. It looks like we're getting some questions coming in to the chat from some of our panelists. So maybe we'll switch it over to doing some
Sure.
Q&A.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you both so much. This is so insightful, and thank you everyone who's stayed on and are submitting questions already. So I've got a bunch, and I'll tee a few up. For those who have yet to ask a question, feel free to just open up the chat or the Q&A and send them over to me, and I'll tee them up to Bryan and Alyson. So the first question that I have here is, it says, as a manager, I feel stressed taking care of my team of 5 people and all of their needs, while also balancing my own personal and family needs. So what can I do to make sure that all of their needs are taken care of as well as mine?
Alyson, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
Yeah, you can jump in.
Sure. So one, I think it's noble that you're trying to take care of all of those people, both your team and then the stuff at home. I think, my first advice would be to start with yourself, because if you're not taking care of yourself, how can you take care of all these other people? And from the way that question is written, it's probably like you're the last person to think about being taken care of. And I think everybody needs to say, what do I need? So you have that extra energy to support other people. So that's like the first step, is for yourself. And then the second thing is, again, part of this is taking care of others. I think about it like you want to have them build the capability to help themselves. That's why that example of like, make sure there's a plan means you might not even need to spend as much time doing it for them, like taking care of them, to use those words, but you can feel better about the fact that they're going to be taken care of through self-care, or they've partnered up with somebody else, or they have a community that they're going to get energy from. And then when you feel good about what are all these, what's my approach with these people, you'll feel less stressed about the uncertainty of what's going to happen, because at least you'll feel like you have steps you put in place.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. I think it's so important to find how you can take care of yourself, so ultimately you can support others. Because if you're stressed, everyone knows, right? The manager who's so stressed out and is frantic, running all over the place, and then their direct reports are going to feel that way as well. So part of it is by finding ways to kind of get grounded and stay resilient, and also knowing that I think a lot of times what's helping me in this is, at the end of the day, there's always going to be more on our to-do list. There's always going to be more things we wish we could get done. Things always are going to maybe go a little bit differently than we had planned, and just being okay with that. And so not putting so much pressure on yourself as an individual if things don't go to plan, if your direct reports are stressed out and unhappy or struggling with XYZ, like, it's okay for it to not be perfect, and to just be vulnerable and honest about that with your team, which is like, I'm struggling too and I'm trying. Here's what I've done, or here's the plan I've put in place. Like, maybe we could try that for you too, but we might need to change it. It might not work, right? It's not a one size fits all for everyone. So I think a huge part of this is, part of it is just acknowledging and having these conversations that we didn't used to have before, and like being okay to be vulnerable and empathetic, that someone might be like going super stir crazy in their house, and another person's like, you don't have kids, what? Why are you so stir crazy and freaking out? Like, I'm at home with 4 kids right now and like can't even, eat a meal in the day. So everyone just has their own perspective and things that they're going through. And I think it's just being open to talking about, like, everyone has their own version of how they're approaching this and what they can do to kind of build resilience through it, and just being honest and open about that.
Yeah, that's great. And that segues into this next question pretty well, which is basically around the difficulty it is to open up mental health conversations and being vulnerable. So are there any questions that you typically ask, or any advice you have on steering the conversation for employees to talk about their mental health care, especially for those who are reluctant to engage in this topic?
Yeah, you go ahead, Bryan.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. This is something when Alyson, when you came to Nextdoor a year ago to talk with us, I still think the first point is the leaders of the company. So people like me, my CEO, Sarah Fryer, like we need to just talk about it first, and in particularly issues we may be dealing with. Because if we're willing to publicly talk about stress that we're dealing with, it kind of makes it makes it easier for people to feel like they can bring it up. And I've just been surprised. I've learned, I guess I'm not as surprised anymore, but I was so surprised at how much feedback I would get when I would say something about it, like at an all hands or at like when Alyson came to do a fireside chat, people just hearing that other people were addressing that, particularly visible leaders, created this opening to then bring up their own, their own challenges, whatever they may be. I think the other thing that I've learned is I just keep talking about what we have available all the time. I keep talking about modern health. We've seen engagement certainly go up with our modern health usage, both in the number of people using it and in how active the people who use it are in these last few months. And I just think it's like you want to make sure people remember that there's resources out there, there's people to talk to, and there's places to go, whether it's articles or practices, because people kind of change. They go through, I don't need that, I'm fine. And then there's a moment where like, you know what? Something's changed. Like I need to do something different here. And you want that to be front of mind for them. So I think we've changed just in our partnership is now more than a year old. People kind of know it's there, where in our first few months, it was just kind of letting people know it was even available. I would get a lot of like, oh, I didn't know you had that, or I didn't know we did that. That's great that we're doing this. Well, now that resource is visible. And so I think to the question of people who are reluctant, making it okay to talk about, and then also know that you're actually taking steps to make something available if they do want to take a step to do it. But I think the flip side is you have to be careful about really trying to force someone to have a conversation they might not be ready for. Even if you think something's going on, they've really got to take that first step forward.
Yep, totally agree with that. I think there's a couple of things. I think one is you definitely can't like force anyone to talk about their mental health or something personal if they don't feel comfortable. But one thing that you can do is, even whether it's at the individual level in a one-on-one or with a team meeting, is just check in, like, how do people feel green, yellow, red? And you'd be surprised how much that opens up a conversation if someone's like, yeah, I'm kind of entering the red zone right now, like didn't sleep at all last night, or like super stressed out about shipping this or getting this done by the end of the week when I've got these other things. And people will jump in and help out, and that just opens the conversation for someone. Even you'd be surprised how few people out there will take a second to actually like scan themselves and be like, am I in the green or yellow or red? Like, where am I today? Like, it's just been going nonstop. And so that's number one, is just checking in, and we'll do that in meetings. We'll check in at all of our leadership meetings. We'll go around and everyone's like, how's everyone doing? What did you do? Something you did this weekend? And just like at least getting someone to open up about something personal about themselves, maybe not related to their mental health, but like something funny or a story, to at least create that connection, so that when you do have that conversation, people feel more comfortable, right? They've built that trust. And then another thing that I think, I obviously preach this stuff a lot, but I think one thing that we can do more with mental health is show how investing in it actually drives really great outcomes. So when I'm out there saying, like, I see a therapist, a coach, and a couples therapist, that actually means that, like, I'm on top of my game. I see a therapist so that I stay super grounded and resilient, and that I don't struggle with depression. I see a couples therapist, my relationship with my partner is freaking awesome. I see a coach to help me manage my team and my company. All of these things help me stay on top of my game and build resilience. I don't do it because I'm necessarily, weak. And I feel like a lot of people often think like, oh, you need to really be struggling, and therefore they don't want to be open about it. And a lot of people out there are struggling, and therefore it can be helpful, but it doesn't just need to be for that. It can be for building resilience and working through these things. And so I think part of this is around changing the conversation that usually comes at the leadership level, of being open about doing these things that have helped them. I can safely say I would literally not be sitting or standing here today if it wasn't for all the time that I invest in getting support for my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I just realized. Thanks for sharing, both of you. I'm going to combine two questions for this next one, and it's around hiring and planning. So basically, with the anxiety and uncertainty as to how long this quarantine will last, there seems to be an increased risk right now for people leaving a job or accepting a new offer. So has anything changed in each of your hiring processes to ease candidates' fears coming to the company? And also if there's processes changing beyond, the way that we conduct these types of virtual interviews and onboarding to create an even deeper trust with new people during this time?
Yeah, I think from our end, I think a lot of people are being drawn to our mission right now. Like it's definitely helping our employer brand of being able to get involved with a purpose that has real meaning in this. We completely flipped to virtual recruiting. It's funny, we have a person starting on our team in a week who none of us have ever met in person. And that's bizarre for me, having hired thousands of people as a recruiting leader and just built different organizations. Like, somebody usually meets them in person along the way. Is not 100% of the time, but is my my normal experience. And it's funny, one of our teammates said, like, what if she's like 6'4"? She was like really tall, not that would be bad, but it just reminded us, like, it's all been on this virtual setting. Like, you just don't know. But that's just, honestly, I think just tactical stuff. Like, the feedback we've got from our candidates is they still really feel heard and seen, and the connection. So I don't think that's really been disrupted. I think one thing that we did for people who had accepted to join but hadn't started yet, and this was during this transition to, like, we actually hadn't gone fully to work from home. We were still kind of in the office. And so we had our recruiters all reach out to everybody via phone, and we're like, hey, do you want to, like, delay your start date? Like, what do you need? And it was interesting. None of them changed anything, but all of them felt really great about the fact that at least we had asked, given everything that's going on, like, what do you need before you join? And then I think what I found, one thing I'm thinking a lot about with onboarding is I've now seen that we have we have a good group of people now who've started in the last month, and they've kind of only worked in this virtual environment. That so much of our acculturating to the company, much of the onboarding that happens at headquarters was in person, that we really need to rethink how we support managers and new hires in this environment. Because, and I put myself in this category, a lot of what happens you just fix in person in the moment, like in those micro exchanges. And so I'm more worried than I've been before about new hires kind of getting lost because they don't have that support of the community in the office.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. One thing that we're doing, I mean, obviously all of our interviews now are virtual, they're all through Zoom, and we've had, I think, 10 people start over the last week that have all been virtual, or even more, 15 been completely remote. One thing that we're doing is just asking the whole team to, like, put on a virtual coffee chat with these people, like, make these people feel warm and welcome. Because I feel like that's the kind of stuff that we do in the office when someone joins from a different team. Someone will throw time on their calendar just to get to know them. And so we can still do that virtually. So we really, really encourage it. We'll make sure that the onboarding is even higher touch. It's actually forcing us to really think about and recreate our onboarding, right? So it's super high touch, and we feel like these people are really, really welcomed, which I think will translate even better when we go back to being in person. And then in regards to the interview process and hiring, I think one thing that we've done is, one, just trying to have even more touch points. So we're probably having more touch points than we would than if it was just in person, in terms of, like, how many times the hiring manager talks to that person or how many times the team talks to them, just so they get more comfortable. And for us, we're a startup, so we are very transparent. We'll walk them through our whole financial plan. We'll be like, here's our plan, and we want people to feel comfortable with that. And I think that helps people, especially for companies, and during this time, get comfortable with working at a startup.
Great, thank you. And maybe we have time for one last question here, and we'll end on this positive note, which is, we would love to hear an anecdote from each of you about positive impacts that have happened from someone who has used one of your products.
Oh my God, there's so many examples.
I know.
Nextdoor right now, like, I can't even select it. I think me, so I live in Oakland, and in my Nextdoor neighborhood, I wanted to start a group, which is one of our product features. Like, you just pull into a setting around a common interest. And I started a group that was just one of those groups, like kind of offering help, like, hey, I'm going to the grocery store. If somebody needs to get something, I'm willing to do it. And I kind of just, it's a little different for me. Like that's something I probably wouldn't do on Twitter or Instagram, but I know the surface area of my neighborhood in Oakland. And, in like less than a week, there was almost 100 people in the group making similar offers. But the gratitude that some people were like, hey, I don't need help right now, but I might, and this means so much to me. Like just being able to have that exchange. And these are people I've never met, but I feel close to because I know their house is kind of too far from where mine is. So I definitely I'm feeling that love in the Nextdoor platform. And that's like symptomatic of what's happening with tens of thousands of people on our platform around the world right now. So it just felt like a way to come together when we're locked in our house to kind of band together against what's happening with this coronavirus.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I will share, actually just pulling it up, a quote. This was actually just before coronavirus hit. This is definitely like a sad and moving quote, but this is like what motivates me every day. I got a quote from a COO of a company that we work with that has a few thousand employees. And she said, I did want to let you know that I had an employee whose baby girl passed away a month ago. He came back to work about a week ago, and in my first meeting with him back at work, he expressed deep gratitude for the modern health benefit and said it had entirely changed his perspective on therapy and was so grateful to be connected with a therapist in a day. He was able to have multiple sessions in the weeks after his daughter died and intends to continue. And he now realizes he can't get through this on his own. The experience has been heartbreaking for him and his team, and I wanted you to know how grateful I am to be able to help employees in these situations like this. One person at a time, this does make a difference. So it's things like that that motivate us to build something that can really help people out there. And whether it's struggling with something catastrophic like that is so incredibly sad, or dealing with, the pandemic of coronavirus and loved ones being at risk and just the stress of everyday life, being able to support those in a time of need is what's incredibly humbling and motivating for us. And it's why we come to work every day. So I'm, while it's incredibly sad to read, it's motivating for us to be able to be there for people.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your stories and your perspectives and taking this time. And for everyone who's on the call, thanks so much for joining. We'll send out a recording as well as follow-ups after this, and look forward to future sessions that we'll be hosting with other leaders. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Alyson.
Thanks
Brian. Happy birthday, Brian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.